Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar, Taking the First Step Towards Organizing a Union. My name is Alana Steide, and I'm the Research and Organizing Manager at the Department for Professional Employees, or DPE. I'm here with my colleague, Katie Barrows, Communications Director at DPE, and we're both based in Washington, D.C. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we'll make it available on our YouTube page in the near future. DPE is a trade organization of the AFL-CIO, which is a large coalition of labor unions. At DPE, we work with 24 union affiliates of the AFL-CIO that represent professionals across the U.S. workforce. We work to grow the labor movement by supporting our affiliate unions' organizing and advocacy efforts. More specifically, we conduct research and legislative advocacy about issues that matter to working professionals. We also create communications and organizing resources, as well as programs and outreach services for our affiliate unions. Some of our programs are open to the public, like this one, to share information about unions and raise awareness of the benefits of joining a union. So here's our agenda. First, we'll talk about why we're hosting this webinar. Then we'll give an overview of your right to form or join a union. Next, we'll briefly discuss the steps it takes to form a union, and then we'll have a conversation with two professionals who recently formed unions at their workplaces through OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union, which is one of our union affiliates. They'll share how they started conversations with their coworkers about forming their respective unions. We'll have a few minutes for questions at the end, so feel free to add your questions using the Q&A function, and remember to check the Send Anonymously box if you'd like to remain anonymous when you ask your question. So why are we hosting this webinar? We conducted a national survey in 2022 of non-union professionals' attitudes about unions. Over 1,800 professionals were surveyed, and we found that 65% said that they would support having a union in their workplace. Additionally, 70% of those professionals who indicated support for a union said that they don't know how to start a conversation with their coworkers about forming a union. So since a majority of non-union professionals support having a union in their workplace, but don't know how to get started, we wanted to tackle that issue in this webinar. So we hear from a lot of professionals who want to be part of a union, but who aren't even sure what a union is or what unions do. If this sounds like you are not alone, don't worry. Our national survey revealed that only a quarter of non-union professionals know at least a fair amount about unions that represent people who work in their industry. So even though support for unions is high, knowledge about unions is unfortunately pretty low. So what is a union? A union is a group of employees in a given workplace who come together to have a say in their workplace to improve pay, benefits, and working conditions. So they do so by negotiating with their employer to codify working conditions in a contract, otherwise known as a collective bargaining agreement. So members collectively determine their priorities in negotiations, vote for the workers who will represent them in union meetings with management, and participate in conventions at local, regional, and national levels to elect their union leaders. So having a union in your workplace improves your pay, benefits, and working conditions, bringing tangible gains to your pocketbook, better work-life balance, and more opportunities to have your voices heard in ways that make a material impact. So you can see, we won't talk about it in depth here, but you can see examples of recent tangible gains made by unionized professionals by visiting our website, dpeaflcio.org, and clicking on the Union Difference tab at the top. And we'll drop a direct link to that page in the chat. Most employees are eligible to join or form a union, and that includes people in professional occupations. There are currently about 6.4 million professionals who are union members. They work in fields including science and technology, healthcare, education, legal services, and the performing arts, just to name a few. In the private sector, you're eligible to organize or join a union as long as you are not a supervisor or manager or a confidential employee. In other words, as long as you don't have the power to hire or fire other employees, do not work in HR, and do not otherwise have the power to set priorities in the workplace. So if you don't qualify in any of those categories, you can be in a union. And we do often get asked, especially among professionals, whether someone in that professional occupation is eligible to be in a union if they have quasi-managerial responsibilities, like if they lead a team and perhaps have the word manager in their title. A lot of times this question needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, whether or not you're eligible to be in a union. But in general, if you do have the authority to hire, fire, and or discipline staff, you would not be eligible to be in a union. The right to join or form a union is protected by US law. The private sector employees are protected by the National Labor Relations Act. And for people working in railway and aviation, there's the Railway Labor Act. Federal employees' right to unionize is protected by the Federal Service Labor Management Relations Statute, and for postal employees, the Postal Reorganization Act. Public sector employees at the state and local level may be protected by state labor laws and collective bargaining laws, but this does depend on the state in which they live. So before I turn it over to Katie, I want to address some misconceptions that often come up when we hear from professionals who want to form a union at their workplace, but who may not know much about unions. First, unions take shape at the workplace level. That means that you can't just join the national union for whatever occupation you might be, because that isn't how labor law is set up in the US. You need to organize at the workplace level. Some professionals work in industries and sectors with already sizable union density, for example, in education and healthcare. But they got this way because professionals in those fields have been building power over many, many years, and that's workplace by workplace. Second, the names of specific unions can often reference the type of profession that the union has historically represented, but unions represent people in a variety of professions, and this has been the case for many, many decades. Third, you might have heard of the phrase right to work, and that your state is a right to work state, which is often the case if you live in certain states in the South or the West. So this term is intentionally misleading. Right to work laws let employees who are represented by a union opt out of paying for their union's administrative services. This enables the employee to reap the union contract's benefits without contributing their fair share while being represented by that union. Right to work laws are meant to weaken unions' bargaining power, which translates to lower wages and less benefits for workers. In fact, states with right to work laws have on average 3.2% lower wages. And contrary to popular belief, right to work laws do not prohibit employees from forming a union at their workplace. If you live in a right to work state and are eligible to be in a union, you have the right to form or join a union at your workplace. And lastly, right to work is often mistaken for at-will employment. which stipulates that an employee may be terminated at any time for any reason. And unfortunately, this is the default arrangement in this country, unless you are a union member with just cause protections in your collective bargaining agreement. So now Katie will continue by outlining the steps that it takes to form a union.
Thank you, Alana. I'm going to briefly go over the basic steps to forming a union, and then we will hear from our guests, who are two professionals who recently formed unions in their workplaces. Um, so the first step to organizing a union is to be connected with a professional union organizer. An organizer from an established national or local union has the resources and experience needed to support you and your coworkers as you form your union. Their knowledge of the organizing process will help you navigate any situation that arises. Following this webinar, we will send everyone a survey where you can let us know if you're interested in connecting with a union organizer from one of our affiliated unions. For the next step, you will need to focus on building support for your union. Before you start having conversations, you will need a full understanding of who among your coworkers are eligible to be part of your union. This is known as mapping the workplace and is an essential part of every organizing campaign. Then you should start having a few initial conversations with coworkers you think would be interested and would do well at moving your union forward. Once you confirm the support of these coworkers, you can recruit them to be part of the organizing committee, also known as the OC. The OC will drive the campaign and divide work between your growing team of supporters, and it is important that your OC is representative of the workplace as a whole. You will continue to build support for your union by having conversations with your coworkers. To get discussions started, you will likely ask your coworkers about what improvements they would like to see in your workplace and how those improvements can be achieved with a union. For example, you might ask them how they feel about their workload or an organization policy, like an in-person or back to office mandate. During this process, it is important to maintain confidentiality and slowly grow the universe of people involved in the campaign. To ensure proper secrecy and to protect yourself, don't use employer platforms. Additionally, these conversations should occur outside of company time and through your own personal communication channels to avoid management finding out about your organizing campaign before you're ready to go public and announce the effort on your own terms. Before we move on to the next steps in the union organizing process, I just want to point out that this slide has a number of examples of conversation starters for talking to your coworkers about forming a union. For the next step, once there is a majority of interest in a union, you and your coworkers will sign confidential authorization cards to express your support for a union. Collecting authorization cards is important to confirm your coworkers' support and are necessary to file for a union election or for your union to be recognized voluntarily through a process called card check, where a neutral third party counts the cards to ensure there is a majority of support in the workplace for your union. After a supermajority of your union eligible coworkers have signed cards, you will either ask your employer for recognition of your union or file a petition for an election with the appropriate labor board. All your union needs is for your employer to agree to voluntarily recognize your union for it to be certified. If your union decides or needs to file for an election, you will work with the labor board and your employer to set the terms of the election. If your union receives 50% plus one support for your union from those who voted, you will win your union and it will be certified. You and your coworkers will then negotiate your union contract. You will select coworkers in your union to represent you during negotiations. This team is known as the bargaining committee, or the BC. The BC will sit down with management and negotiate over pay, benefits, and working conditions. The process usually involves regular meetings and the exchange of proposals until there is mutual agreement. Once your bargaining committee has an agreement with management on the components of a whole union contract, all of your coworkers in the union will have the opportunity to vote on the union contract. If it is approved, it will be implemented in the workplace. Now we'll hear from our guests who can share their real life experiences, having discussions with their coworkers about forming a union and winning their unions. Tonight, we are joined by Angela Santilli and Alex um, Ye- uh, I'm messing up.
Kazarian is
Zagarian.
fine. Kazarian is okay.
Zagazarian. There we go. Um, and Angela, Angela is a micro enterprise development counselor for the International Rescue Committee, IRC, which is a global humanitarian relief NGO and is based out of IRC's San Jose office. Her office formed a union with OPEIU and won recognition of their union in September 2024. Alex is a housing coordinator at Brilliant Corners in Los Angeles. Brilliant Corners is a housing nonprofit in California, and they work to match people with buildings that will take subsidized tenants. Alex and his 320 coworkers formed a union with OPEIU in March 2024, and now they are in the process of bargaining their first contract. Thank you both for joining us. Can you both start off by telling us how you became involved in the union organizing campaign in your workplace? Maybe Alex, you want to start, and then we'll and then Angela.
Sure. I think in a lot of workplaces there are like just whisper networks. And if there is a campaign going on, they're kind of like always listening. They're seeing, who can be placed to talk with new people, etc. And in my case, my sister told me, and my sister was a veteran of the company. She was involved with the initial organizers, and she knew, my own political sympathies, and she said, "Hey, the organizing union, do you want to, come to meetings and help out?" And then I joined.
Awesome. For me, at the International Rescue Committee, I went to a conference in February of 2024 and was networking with some of my colleagues from other offices and found out that our office down in Dallas had recently unionized. They were the first one in the country. And so I asked for the union's information based on who I was talking to at the conference, came back to California, called OPEIU, got their information, and then began organizing in San Jose in March. So super exciting to be part of a nationwide movement.
And after becoming involved in the organizing campaign in your workplace, how did you feel about talking to your coworkers? And then how did you start these conversations once you were tasked with talking to folks?
So it was definitely hard. Um, Most of organizing union is talking to people, and it's talking to people who you don't know. And especially if your, workplace is very large and has a variety of different demographics that comprise um, the workers, you need skills and backgrounds of all sorts. So it's difficult because the topics can be sensitive, and a lot of people, are resistant at first, especially if they like all the benefits on paper. Um, they may need some convincing, right? And that requires a lot of organic connection and like effort over time to like build those connections. But the way to start a union is to have conversations, and it is to get to what is issues that people are having in the workplace and helping them visualize how a contract can begin to address those issues.
Yes, lots of conversations. I'll echo what Alex said there. I would go on walks with people either during breaks or at the end of the workday near the office. Really try to get their personal information, phone number, email address. I had a template of what I would email out to people, and IRC Dallas made it really easy for me in the sense that I could link an article about them having unionized, but I also linked information that was on OPEIU's webpage to help educate people about what a union can provide. And so when I would start the conversations, it would really depend on who I was talking to and how well I knew them. So if I knew that somebody had a really long commute, maybe I would start off the conversation being like, how's the commute going now that we're back to 3 days in person? And then say, well, hey, like, did you hear IRC Dallas unionized? What do you think about that? What if we could negotiate a different work flexibility from home in person, and see what they say, and then get their information and follow up from there.
And like, how were you feeling going into the conversations? Like, were you nervous, or like, you know, yeah, like I believe this is both of your first time, you know, organizing a union. So yeah, what can you talk about kind of your feelings starting conversations?
Yeah, I had experience, uh, on political campaigns before doing union organizing, so I was not really a stranger to talking to strangers. Um, but it is nerve-wracking, there's no way around it. And especially, every campaign is different. There is a, quote unquote union playbook that like organizers really try to help organizers kind of like follow, because there's just some like hard won knowledge that like just works. um, I was nervous a lot too, because for my campaign, we had a lot of cold calling, right? Um, we didn't really have an office where we can meet people and, oh, it's lunchtime, let's go and have a walk together, right? So we had to train our OC to engage in cold calling all across the state of California. So, you know, somebody in Inland Empire would be getting a call from someone from Los Angeles, and why would that be, right? So it is nerve-wracking, and a lot of a lot of an OC's job, especially for the people who are like really committed to the organizing work, is training people who, have one foot in the door to be comfortable with engaging conversations with strangers. What's fortunate though is that if they're your coworker, right? So you have an easy base of conversation, right? It's the work. And so, even if I was calling a housing coordinator in San Francisco and I'm calling from Los Angeles, we may not have the exact same responsibilities, but they rhyme, right? And so, a lot of our concerns would also be similar. So it is nerve-wracking, but it's important to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I would say that my feelings were a bit mixed. A lot easier to talk to someone who's on your team and maybe you communicate regularly with and have a strong relationship with. I think that for people that you don't know, it can be hard. I would definitely try to have people talk to them that were already interested, that were closer to them. But there are going to be times when you have to talk to people that you've never spoken to before. And I think that what's important is to just lean in and try to get over your fear of it, because once you've done it one or two times, it becomes way less nerve-wracking.
And generally, what were your colleagues' responses when you know, how did they react when you started talking to them about forming a union? Alex, or Angela, do you want to go first this time, and then
Sure.
Alex?
Sure. Even though I was nervous with some of the people that I didn't talk to as much in the office, overall, people were really excited. Even though I was a little bit uncertain for some of them. And some of the people that I was a little bit nervous about or unsure of how to gauge them have actually been some of the people that have been most supportive and involved in the campaign now. Some of them needed to go through documents that I had emailed out about OPEIU and IRC Dallas's process unionizing. I'd say that a few were a hard nose, but some of the ones that were hard nose actually still supported it, just were really not feeling comfortable signing a card due to fear of retaliation, especially if they had been up for a promotion or had been there a short time or were a refugee themselves and concerned about job stability.
Yeah, I would say that the reactions are mixed, right? And a lot of times reactions are going to kind of be synonymous with the employee's kind of position in the company. So I work at a housing nonprofit that mostly deals with the unhoused in California. So people who are doing frontline work were usually more friendly, to the idea of organizing and increasing pay, whereas somebody in the back line in finance may not be. But that doesn't hold true all the time, right? And we had housing coordinators we had to convince, and we had case managers we had to convince. And our data and tech staff was, the backbone of our OC, right? And so, you begin to get a sense over time as to like who who, which department will react in what way, but you never really know until, because you're always working with individuals. And to echo what Angela was saying earlier about getting people who know the work to do the conversations for you, like having that like spearhead is like very important. We had one person who was on the finance team who knew the finance team, flipped them overnight for us, right? And so I can't speak finance the way a finance person can. And so they can speak to concerns, much better. But it does range, right? And we had people who, were really reacted to our suggestion on our cold calling with cold feet, right? Like, no, I'm not, hang up, right? We're not doing this. We had some people who kind of jumped aboard and were like, oh, hell yeah, let's do it. And it really does kind of range and reactions. But yeah, and I think if you're calling because you're organizing a union, in general, it's because some people want to see change, right? They feel like there's something that, can be done. And a lot of people are just looking for an invite, or they're looking for, uh, permission, like, oh, we can do this, right? And I think that's kind of a big hurdle, is getting people to understand that, they don't really need permission to ask for more.
And Angela, you touched on this a bit, but can you both speak to what were some of the concerns your coworkers had about unionizing, and how did you address their concerns?
Yeah, at our office, retaliation was definitely the biggest concern, and I'm sure that that is a common experience when organizing in the workplace. And I think it was a big ask for some of our colleagues that are from different countries and are maybe less familiar with systems in the United States. They're new here and don't want to jeopardize their job. And, there were some that we were able to get on board and others that we weren't. But really, at the end of the day, I would tell them, retaliation is illegal. And I'm going to have your back in any way that I can here, and just reinforce that, Dallas won their union. Leadership is aware of that, and that they're going to continue on to bargaining, and that we can do that too here if we want those benefits, even if it's scary.
Yeah, I think Angela had the right tactic. Is that the truth is that there's a lot of misconceptions and lies, frankly, about like workers' rights in this country. So the best thing you can do is like tell the truth with coworkers, right? That like you're engaging in free speech. This is a protected activity. They have rights that, if your employer infringes upon, is illegal for them. And, just giving them as much information as you can about like what it is a union can do for them, I think is like will do so much for you, right? Because like you really are battling, 50 years of anti-labor myths in this country. Because I think everybody has an idea, of unions that are like quite dated, right? And so I found that like with a lot of people, a values-based argument about, a democratic workplace, or workers being able to have a say in the running, or the use of their labor, was a very persuasive kind of like tactic for us, and letting people understand, like even conceptually, like, what a union is, right? And so, especially when you get to questions about dues, right? The conversation about like teaching people that like, it's not me, it's not OPIU coming to do this for us. It's me, Alex, housing coordinator, and we've identified an issue, and we're asking you, new person, do you want to help us with this issue, and win a contract regarding it? And I think when you frame it in that personal terms, it becomes much more palatable to people, and they begin to understand what it means to, form a union.
And what advice would you give other professionals who are, starting to organize, or considering organizing their workplaces, and about how to start reaching out to their coworkers about unionizing?
It was a lot easier in general to get union support than I anticipated. You just have to get over the fear of asking. And even though it can be nerve-wracking, it was an opportunity for me to connect with people from other departments. And I feel like now I know everyone in the office. I have a better idea of how the organization runs as a whole. And you just have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit. the ball will start rolling. That you might hit some bumps, you might hit some no's, but in general, the data that was shown at the beginning of this presentation of the number that support it is right on and totally aligns with my experience. And definitely make a map of who is going to talk to who. You know, I was able to get about 5 people pretty quickly that were interested in being on a part of the organizing committee. And based on their relationships with people in the office, we mapped it out, and that will help a lot.
Yeah, I guess to echo exactly what Angela was saying is that like it really does start small, and it really does begin with a few people just talking, on a break, and then maybe that leads to a happy hour, right? You really will begin to like get to know people on a much more personal level. Like the people in the OC are now like friends of mine, I would say possibly for life. I'm pretty much always going to be calling them, like hanging out with them. But that's kind of like what it means to build a connection of like workers, you know, at your companies. You get to know people, right? And it means you have to open yourself up to both experiences and people and asks that you would not ordinarily be comfortable with. But, kind of like exercising, it's scary to do, but it's so much worth it to have done it. Um, and especially with like it's a little bit of constancy like goes a long way, right? And so when you have a happy hour and only like 2 people show up, you know, you don't be sad that you don't be sad that you don't have 15 people. You'd be happy you got 2, right? And like I use game nights, because I'm really big into like tabletop RPGs and board games and whatnot. And our first board game night, we had a manager and 1 person show up. And that 1 person who showed up ended up being one of the most valuable people in our seat, right? And so little actions build over time. And, as long as you have like a vision of what what an organized workplace looks like for people and you're consistent about communicating that with your coworkers, just open yourself up to like, their suggestions, their ideas, and, it never gets built by 1 person. You really do have to, rely on everybody's experiences and everybody's skill and knowledge. And over time, it happens. You win and it feels good.
Well, thank you both. Now I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. So, folks who want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function to ask your question about unions for professionals and union organizing. Remember to check the send anonymously box if you'd like to remain anonymous when you ask your questions. And just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded to share in the future. And we will we will also be taking questions after the webinar. So if we don't get to yours, you can email us at organize@dpeaflcio.org, and we will get back to you with an answer. I did see a question that I think maybe Angela, you would be best suited to answer. That was asking if there were tips for talking to colleagues about unionizing while at a conference together. This person says, question. We are remote and it's rare to get face time, but how do we make sure we're off the clock in a conference setting?
Yeah, good question. So for my organization in general, they try to book people at the same hotel when traveling for conferences. So, after we finished the day, we all walked back to the hotel. We went to the rooftop bar and just kind of started talking about work. And it didn't come up right away, but it was a group of about 5 of us. And as we kind of started talking more about, well, what's it like at your office? And hearing that, and then all of a sudden someone was like, hey, Dallas just unionized. So I think asking those open-ended questions about how things are at other offices, you never know when someone's going to know something, or if there's space for collaboration. Now I attend national Zoom calls with 7 other offices that have now unionized across the country. So it has really picked up.
Do you mind if I jump in and follow up? So Angela, I loved your response to that. I think part of the question is also, the concern about, are we off the clock when we have these conversations in a conference setting? And I think I wouldn't so much be concerned about whether or not you're off the clock. You're at work with your colleagues having conversations, and that is like a wonderful opportunity to get to know your colleagues better. I would just make sure that, as you're having conversations with colleagues and starting, learning more about the, work lives of your colleagues, that you just make sure that these conversations are happening out of earshot of supervisors and managers, right? Or other folks that you just don't know very well and are not quite sure how they might react. Like I would say make sure that you feel like this is a nice, safe environment in which to start a conversation like this.
Yeah, to briefly add on to that, Alana, I would say, that conversation wouldn't have happened like during the day when we were all in the same room. It was definitely a more social setting after the end of the day when everybody felt comfortable, like just catching up and talking about how it is at all of our offices. So gauge the situation.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. And so we have again, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll work on getting through the questions and answering it. We have somebody has a question about their staff size that's right under 20 in their bargaining unit, and whether a union would want to work with them. I would say we've seen, we've definitely seen smaller units. So a lot of things, what union you're connected with, there's a number of variables that it depends on location, and it depends on what kind of workplace. So if you email us at organize@dpeafl-cio.org, we will work with you to find a union. The next one is a question about dues. And the question is, can you share more about how much dues end up being? Well, the first thing I'll note is you do not pay dues until you get your first union contract. And so, that's after it's negotiated, and then your whole your coworkers in the union vote to ratify it. And I haven't heard of a union contract that doesn't get you more benefits than what you pay in dues. And the dues, generally go to the to implementing the contract. But as far as how much they end up being, it really depends on the union. I would say kind of the range is about around a little, like some unions are like right under 1%, and others are about, it can go up a little, like maybe to 1.5% of your earnings. So but it really depends on the union. And you'll work with your union and make sure that you get a contract that is, well worth your dues. I don't know if Alex and Angela, you want to say anything more about dues?
Yeah, it really does depend on the union you're working under. When our campaign went public and we had a lot of dues questions, we had a due sheet we can share, right? That was like, if you make this amount of dollars, a year, this is what you can expect to pay per paycheck. If you make this amount, this is what you can expect. And so all that's public. So, I would say is look what union you're working under. Your local should have a due sheet. And when people start asking about it, you can say, well, here's the information. If you make this amount, you'll make this. And if you make this amount, you'll pay this. And they tend to use a progressive scale. So the more you make in the company, the more you'll end up paying. But again, it really depends on the union. So it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, this was a very common question that people asked while organizing, actually. And I think what Katie said was something that made most people at ease, which was, we don't have any dues until we've agreed on a contract at the end. And then people are like, okay, I know that people have already been emailing the IRC and possibly OPEIU to ask about dues right now, even though we're just getting started with negotiating. So I think once people understand, no, we're going to understand what's on our contract first before they genuinely feel a bit better. But I give them a range as well that OPEIU provided.
Thank you both for that. We did also get a question from someone who works at a veterinary company, and they say that they've gathered a lot of colleagues and friends in the Bay Area. They want to grow their union support by kind of going to various hospitals to make sure that their colleagues are on board in various hospitals, but they ask, would it be wise to only start with my home location? My hospital is technically corporate and we have locations on both coasts. So back to what I was saying earlier about organizing by workplace. Usually that overwhelmingly makes the most sense in terms of embarking on an organizing campaign. But it does depend on, I guess, how much overlap you and your colleagues have in various facilities. So if you split your time between other hospital locations, this is all to say it might be a more complicated answer than we can offer here. It might require a little bit more information that you would need to share with us to fully answer that question. But it's a matter of a community of interest that can be defined as a bargaining unit. So it's a group of coworkers that work together in that workplace that can be defined as a bargaining unit. I hope that I've answered that question at least somewhat adequately based on your kind of specifics. But of course, we dropped our email in the chat, so please reach out to us. I think we do have at least one other, I would say, quite specific question that we've received here that I'm not sure we'd be able to respond to live in this moment. So I would highly encourage you to contact us at organize@dpeaflcio.org.
And following up, Alana, we do have two of our questions that kind of, I mean, in a similar vein to the veterinary question. Is it possible to unionize only certain departments or teams in a company? And is it possible to unionize when workers live in different states and around the country within the same organization? As Alana was touching on, that a bargaining unit under labor law is defined by whether employees have a community of interest. And like in some cases, if you have offices in different states, it's you will have to organize office by office. But like say you're remote and you all are, I'll just throw something out there, computer programmers for a company. Now that might be a community interest where you can organize among different states. This is really something you would have to work out with an organizer and determine, what is the best community of interest, what really makes sense as a bargaining unit for your workplace. It's hard to really answer abstractly, but it's something an organizer would be able to work with you, look at what everyone's jobs are, responsibilities, where and how they work, if they're remote, if they work out of an office, and work with you to figure that out. And it is possible to organize only certain departments, but that may, that's something, again, you will want to work with an organizer to determine, the best strategy for. It's under labor law, it could, it could be potentially challenged by the employer, and they may, not be able to organize just one department. It really kind of depends on your situation. So I would again encourage you to reach out, and we can connect you with an organizer who can figure out, what the best path forward is for you and your coworkers. Another question we have is pretty I guess general. the question is tips for engineers, all types of engineers. I mean, I don't think there's not much different. I mean, I know the stereotypes of engineers can be uncomfortable having conversations, but I think, you know, that's just it's going to be the same as other workers where or professionals where you're going to have conversations with your coworkers, and maybe, you know, if any, you know, depending how you usually interact with them, maybe there is some kind of way you communicate with your coworkers that you could talk about a union. I don't know if Alex or Angela, you have any advice for maybe folks who are more introverted or, you know, less comfortable, you know, having conversations.
Well, I don't want to stereotype about engineers, so I assume the asker himself is an engineer. To which I say, you know, you probably know these particular engineers better than we do, right? I know that for persuasion in general, everybody has different kind of wants or desires for the union. For some people, it's just straight, you know, increased pay. For other people, it's ideological, right? They just like the idea of an interconnect. They like the idea of like a workforce that's working together, right? So I would say with this particular group that you're thinking about, you know, as individuals, you know, try to understand, you know, what are some pressure points in their work, right, that you can press on them, right? What's the vision that the union can do for them that you'd like to like bring up, you know, for them to think about, to mull over, right? Assuming they're the logical kind, right? You know, you may want to bring up statistics, you know, about union work and union benefits that may persuade them. I don't want to generalize on the, you know, reaction because of their profession. Because the truth is, like I said before, everyone has different reasons as to why they would organize. And that's something that, you know, is difficult to generalize just based on the profession. So assuming that they're introverted, you know, if that's the assumption, then the answer is kind of go baby steps. Like we had a lot of people were afraid to do cold calling because our entire campaign is based on cold calling, right? Because we had work phones that we would cold call people with, and really only 3 or 4 people were comfortable doing that, and 4 people can like would find it very difficult to call 320 people. So, you know, we kind of had to like slowly encourage people to kind of like get more comfortable cold calling by starting small, right? Or setting kind of small goals or small targets and, you know, being very public about our discussion so that people can feel the kind of okay, well, these people are making the calls. Maybe I should too, right? And, you know, never goading people, but kind of showing them that it's possible and that it's, you know, even easy and that there's like a benefit here and there's momentum that we're gaining. So for getting introverts involved, you know, I do recommend starting small and, you know, and doing the work publicly so people can see the effectiveness of like working and talking to people. Because a lot of people will convince themselves that, oh, I can help out in other ways. But if you're not talking with people, then, you know, your union OC meetings may slowly become, you know, complaining sessions rather than organizing sessions.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One is that, like Alex said, ideally you want to figure out what topic you want to agitate them around to get them to be a yes vote. And if you can't figure out what that is and they're more introverted, you know, they're the safer topics. Pay, job stability, like you want that security in case of layoffs, commute time. So those are safer topics, I would say in general. But for people who are also more introverted, I think, and maybe just in general, people who need more time to like process or like make their decision, following up via email for me was really great because, you know, we could go back and forth there as they like thought about it on their own time.
Thank you both for those tips. I will also note that there are plenty of engineers who have organized unions. So it's something that engineers have done, and if that's, you know, that's maybe something helpful to tell your colleagues is that there are engineers who are union members.
Jump in and just add one more. Sorry, we're like spending a lot of
Yep.
time on this one question, but I did want to add just one more, I guess, like food for thought kind of thing. It doesn't matter whether someone's an introvert, an extrovert, or what. If you sense that someone has support and actually wants to become an activist and, take an active role in being part of the organizing committee or even just like helping in some other way, take advantage of that desire and interest, figure out what their strengths are, because there's all kinds of things that, all kinds of tasks that could be done, or actions or activities. So say someone likes playing tabletop games and really wants to gather folks around like a game night, like that is a wonderful opportunity. And you don't have to be an engineer, right? Like that doesn't matter. But I would say maybe if you do sense that a colleague wants to get interested, like wants to take part but doesn't quite know how, help them figure out how they would want to contribute.
And do we have any other questions? I think we've gone over all the ones that we can, answer generally aloud. So if folks have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A box. So we'll give you like a minute and to see, but if we don't have any other questions, we will be ending shortly. And again, you can always email us your questions.
I would also, while we're waiting for any other questions to come in our last couple of minutes together, just want to make sure that we thank Angela and Alex for your time and for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you so much. And based on the
thank you so much.
conversation, if there's any last little snippets of advice or thoughts you want to share on your experiences, please let us know.
Just do it. It's so exciting. It's so fun. Just lean into any discomfort and you will not regret it.
Yeah, it's worth doing, and it is scary, but it really is kind of a muscle. And I think a lot of people, I think you'll find this day and age that people really are craving connection of some kind. How many people complain that, they feel lonely, when they get back from work, right? Or that they feel lonely in general. And organizing does kind of offer an outlet for people. It helps create an end goal, for them to look at and for them to like rally behind. And I know that, I feel that my life has changed from doing this kind of work and especially from getting to know the people in my workplace a little better. Um, so, a lot of people will complain about working, late, even after work, like, we're not getting paid to organize, but, you do it because you love talking to people and because you believe in a future with your coworkers. And, it's kind of the sell to people, right? You're selling them an idea of a better future together. And, it's worth doing.
We have a question about a specific workplace where there's one union already in part of the workplace, but it's not for engineers. And so that's something where you're it seems like if you're not part of that union and no one's approached you about joining that union, that it's specifically for that other group. And potentially you would need to organize your own union for engineers. And so I would suggest to this person to reach out to us. We can connect you with an organizer who can talk to you specifically about your workplace and determine, if and determine if that other union, which I suspect that it's only for the manufacturing folks, is they can determine whether that's the union to join or if you need to organize a union yourself. But that's so I would say please reach out. It's hard to get into the specifics without knowing more about your workplace. we have another question about departments unionizing without the rest of the company joining. Again, this is another question that really depends on the specifics of your workplace. There are organizations where just one department is union, or one set of occupations are unionized. But this is something that you would have to work with an organizer on to determine if that's possible in your workplace. So it's something I would email us, and we can connect you to an organizer, and they can work with you to determine if the department organizing you're thinking of organizing a specific department is the best path forward, or if it's something that labor law would allow. Um, okay, so we coming to the end of our webinar. Thank you to our guest speakers for sharing the information about their own experience talking to coworkers in their workplace, and thank you all to all of you who joined us tonight.